August 22nd, 2025, 23-year-old Iryna Zarutska boarded the Lynx Blue Line train in Charlotte after completing her evening shift at a local pizzeria. She sat in the carriage as 34-year-old Decarlos Brown Jr., a man with a long criminal record and a documented history of schizophrenia, took a seat directly behind her. For several minutes, the ride continued without incident. Then, in an unprovoked act of violence, the journey ended in tragedy. Surveillance cameras captured the attack in full detail, leaving investigators with direct evidence of what happened. Brown was arrested minutes later and charged with first-degree murder, while also facing federal charges connected to the use of public transportation in the crime. The case drew national attention, not only for the circumstances of Zerutska's death, but also for what it revealed about bail reform, mental health oversight, and transit safety across the United States.
We have new details in a deadly stabbing on a Cat's rail line. Thanks for joining us for your news at 6. I'm Siobhan Bryan. It was 2 weeks ago today that this woman, Iryna Zarutska, a Ukrainian refugee, was killed while riding the light rail in South Charlotte. Since that time, there have been several questions about what happened, why it happened, and could it have been prevented. Today, Cats released surveillance video of the events leading up to and after her murder. And we want to warn you, some of these images could be considered disturbing to our viewers. We're not sharing images of the attack, but rather what led up to it.
Stay with us as we unravel this shocking story and uncover the heartbreaking details of what led to this senseless loss. Before we begin, let us know in the comments, where are you watching from? And what are your thoughts as the story unfolds? Welcome to True Crime Tales, where we reveal the crimes that shock communities and the secrets hidden behind closed doors. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what's coming next. Now, let's begin. Iryna Zarutska was born on May 22nd, 2002, in Kiev, Ukraine. She grew up in the capital city during a period of relative stability before the escalation of conflict in the region. Her childhood was shaped by a mix of traditional Ukrainian values and exposure to the cultural environment of a European city undergoing political change. She was raised in a close-knit family that valued education, discipline, and community. From an early age, Iryna showed interests that reflected creativity and compassion. She pursued academic studies while also dedicating time to hobbies that allowed her to express her artistic abilities. She was known for her talent in drawing, designing clothing, and sculpting. Alongside her artistic pursuits, she developed a strong connection with animals, often caring for pets and expressing a long-term interest in veterinary work. Her education followed the Ukrainian schooling system, where she demonstrated discipline and commitment. Teachers and peers recognized her not only for academic capability, but also for her willingness to assist others. By her teenage years, Iryna's personality had been defined by a balance of creativity and responsibility. In 2022, the Russian invasion of Ukraine disrupted her life entirely. The outbreak of full-scale war forced many families, including hers, to make urgent decisions about safety and survival. Kiev, as a central target during the conflict, became unsafe for civilians. The Zerutska family was split during this period. Some relatives remained in Ukraine, including her father, while others, including Iryna, sought refuge abroad. The war displaced millions, and she became part of that movement, leaving behind her home, familiar surroundings, and elements of her early identity. The displacement carried long-term consequences. Leaving a homeland under attack meant severing daily connections, cultural familiarity, and a sense of security. For Iryna, this represented not only physical relocation, but also an emotional toll. The war forced her to start over in a new country while coping with the uncertainty of her family's situation in Ukraine. After fleeing Ukraine, Iryna resettled in Charlotte, North Carolina. The city became the new foundation for her life in the United States. Like many refugees, her adaptation involved immediate responsibilities and integration into unfamiliar systems. She secured employment at a local pizzeria, where she worked regular shifts. The pizzeria became a steady point of routine for her, providing both income and structure. On the night of the incident, she had just finished a routine shift, wearing her work uniform as she boarded the Lynx Blue Line train. Her social circles in Charlotte were modest but meaningful. She interacted with co-workers, neighbors, and members of the local Ukrainian community. She was known for assisting others and offering help whenever needed. These connections provided her with a sense of belonging in a foreign environment. Iryna was consistently described as a creative and kind individual. Friends and family highlighted her compassion for animals and her focus on personal growth. She held ambitions of becoming a veterinary assistant, a path that aligned with her lifelong affinity for animal care. Outside of professional aspirations, she pursued clothing design and sculpting, creating art that reflected her creativity. Neighbors noted her reliability, often remembering her as someone who cared for their pets and offered support in daily tasks. These qualities reinforce her image as someone dependable and resourceful. Despite her strengths, Iryna lived with vulnerabilities tied to her refugee status. Adapting to a new country required navigating systems such as employment, housing, and transportation. Without personal access to a vehicle, she relied on Charlotte's public transportation system, including the Lynx Blue Line, for daily mobility. While public transit provided affordability and access, it also exposed her to risks outside of her control. Her position as a refugee, a worker dependent on late shifts, and a young woman navigating an unfamiliar environment created circumstances of vulnerability. The man accused in her death was identified as 34-year-old Decarlos Brown Jr. at the time of the incident. He had a history of homelessness and instability. His life had been marked by frequent interactions with law enforcement and periods of incarceration. Brown's criminal record revealed a lengthy pattern of offenses. He had been arrested at least 14 times before the murder. These charges included robbery with a dangerous weapon, larceny, and assault. His history reflected not only property crimes, but also violent acts. His arrests also documented unusual and erratic behavior. On more than one occasion, he misused emergency services by calling 911 and reporting delusions, such as claims his body had been implanted with man-made material. He had also been known to issue threats against strangers. Brown served between 5 and 6 years in prison for armed robbery, a conviction that stemmed from his violent tendencies. Despite this record, he was later released back into the community. His release became one of the focal points of criticism following the incident, raising questions about the justice system's handling of repeat violent offenders. Records indicated that Brown had been diagnosed with schizophrenia. His documented mental health struggles included delusions, paranoia, and erratic conduct that had repeatedly drawn law enforcement attention. His condition had not been managed in a structured environment, and his mental health issues remained largely untreated within the broader system. Previous encounters with law enforcement highlighted instability that had not been addressed through consistent care or intervention. Earlier in 2025, Brown was released on cashless bail despite his extensive criminal history and documented mental health condition. The decision, made by Judge Teresa Stokes, sparked significant controversy. Critics argued that releasing an individual with a history of violence and instability presented a direct risk to public safety. Following Iryna's death, the bail decision became a central point in political and legal debates. Legislators and community leaders questioned whether systemic failures in the judicial system enabled the crime to occur. On the evening of August 22, 2025, 23-year-old Iryna Zarutska boarded a Lynx Blue Line train in Charlotte, North Carolina. The time was recorded at approximately 9:46 p.m., and the boarding took place at the East/West Boulevard station. Iryna had just completed her shift at a local pizzeria, where she worked to support herself after relocating to the United States from Ukraine. She was still in her work uniform, a simple outfit that indicated she was returning home from a routine job rather than preparing for any unusual activity. Her routine depended heavily on public transportation, which was common for her as a recent immigrant. On this ride, she entered the train car and took a seat. Directly behind her, another passenger positioned himself. Later identified as 34-year-old Decarlos Brown Jr. unknown to Iryna, Brown had a long criminal record, a history of mental health struggles, and prior arrests for violent offenses. There was no interaction between them as the train departed the station. The train began its scheduled route, with a handful of passengers present in the car. Nothing about the scene suggested imminent violence. The atmosphere appeared normal and unremarkable, as captured by the surveillance cameras positioned inside the car. Approximately 4 minutes into the ride, Without any words exchanged, Brown produced a folding knife from his possession. The motion was sudden and direct, without warning or provocation. He leaned forward and struck Iryna. The assault involved 3 separate blows, including at least one directed at her neck. The wounds were immediately severe, and the strikes rendered her unable to respond or defend herself. Witnesses later confirmed that she did not exchange any words with Brown during or before the attack. The fatal blow to her neck caused rapid blood loss and collapse. Within seconds, Iryna fell forward motionless and remained on the floor of the train car. The attack had lasted only moments, but left irreversible consequences. The passengers inside the train were forced into sudden confrontation with what had occurred. Some individuals panicked, moving away from the scene. Others attempted to record the incident on their phones, capturing the immediate aftermath rather than intervening. A few passengers displayed visible shock, while others attempted to offer assistance or at least observe what was happening. This difference in reaction later became a point of discussion in public forums. While some bystanders attempted to call for help, others appeared frozen or indifferent. The surveillance video showed a spectrum of responses ranging from panic to passive observation. Importantly, throughout the incident, no conversation or argument occurred between Iryna and Brown. The attack was entirely one-sided, sudden, and unprovoked. This fact was emphasized repeatedly in both law enforcement statements and later public reporting, underscoring that the two were strangers. After delivering the fatal wounds, Brown did not flee in a chaotic manner. Instead, he attempted to compose himself and leave in a calculated way. First, he removed the sweatshirt he had been wearing. He used this article of clothing to wrap his hand, which had been injured during the stabbing. His movement suggested an attempt to conceal evidence of the struggle or manage his injury, while avoiding drawing unnecessary attention. Once the train reached the next stop, Brown exited the car. He did so in a calm and deliberate fashion, walking off the platform as though disengaging from the scene without urgency. Witnesses and surveillance footage documented this behavior, which contrasted sharply with the violence that had just unfolded. Despite his attempts, his escape did not last long. Within minutes, law enforcement officers apprehended him on the platform. His presence and appearance, along with passenger descriptions, made identification straightforward. He was taken into custody without resistance. Emergency responders were quickly called to the scene inside the train car. Their efforts focused on reviving Iryna Zarutska, who was found unresponsive on the floor after the attack. Despite the medical interventions attempted, Iryna's injuries proved fatal. She was pronounced dead at the scene. The wounds inflicted, particularly the strike to her neck, had caused catastrophic damage that could not be reversed. The attempt to save her life ended within minutes of arrival.
We have new details in a deadly stabbing on a cat's rail line. Thanks for joining us for your news at 6. I'm Siobhan Bryan. It was 2 weeks ago today that this woman, Iryna Zarutska, a Ukrainian refugee, was killed while riding the light rail in South Charlotte. Since that time, there have been several questions about what happened, why it happened, and could it have been prevented. Today, CATS released surveillance video of the events leading up to and after her murder. And we want to warn you, some of these images could be considered disturbing to our viewers. We're not sharing images of the attack, but rather what led up to it. WBTV anchor Jamie Bowl joins me live in studio with more on that video. Jamie?
Yeah, Siobhan, first, before we show you anything, we think it's important for everyone at home to understand the process we go through in cases like this. Awful things happen. Sometimes our photojournalists are there for the incidents. Other times we get video from police body cameras, or in this case, Charlotte Area Transit. We request video from agencies all the time. We do it to confirm what we have been told is backed up by the available video. It's about transparency. It's about confirmation. Now, when we get video like we did today, it doesn't just mean we put it on the air. In fact, often we don't show it, or it's heavily edited, especially when it's violent and graphic. We ask questions of ourselves. Does this video show us something important? Does it give us new or better insight into what happened? Is there news value in showing it? And then we factor in decency and privacy. Tonight, we've decided to air a portion of the video provided by CATS. We're doing that because it verifies what we've been told about this incident, and that is newsworthy given the public attention and the demands for safety improvements. We will not be showing the actual stabbing itself. It's 9:46 p.m. You'll notice right away, this looks like any other ride aboard the light rail. People are doing what they do these days, keeping to themselves, scrolling on their phones as they ride along. The man accused in the killing, Decarlos Brown, is in the red hoodies on the right side of your screen. He appears to be maybe a little emotional, perhaps a little agitated, but nothing disruptive. There's nothing that gets anyone's attention. About 30 seconds later, Iryna Zarutska boards. She's wearing a hat and a t-shirt from a pizzeria, and she sits in the row in front of Brown. She has earbuds in and is looking at her phone. She too is just minding her own business. They ride along for around 4 minutes with nothing unusual happening. Then around 9:50 p.m., Brown reaches into a pocket. We've zoomed in on it here. He pulls out a pocket knife. No one notices a thing. Seconds later, he would stand up, and from behind, unprovoked, as we stop the video, he would stab the young woman several times. She had no chance to defend herself. The attack was over in seconds, and when it was over, Brown walked through the train attempting to get off. Few passengers, if any, at first realized what had happened, until they noticed drops of blood on the floor. 90 seconds after the attack, a bystander rushes down to begin lending aid to Zerutska. She would die from her injuries. 30 seconds later, 9:52 p.m., 6 minutes into the video, Brown leaves the light rail. The video here shows us just how quickly things happened and how difficult it would have been to prevent once he got on the train. And that is an important part to all of this. From what we've been told, Brown never should have been on the train. Authorities tell WBTV he did not buy a ticket. CAT says it is working on ways to keep fare skippers off mass transit. Siobhan?
Once Brown was in custody, charges were immediately prepared. He was formally charged with first-degree murder for the killing of Iryna Zarutska. Due to his hand injury sustained during the stabbing, he was transported for medical treatment under police supervision before being moved to a detention facility. Law enforcement statements clarified that the victim and suspect had no prior relationship. The incident was classified as an unprovoked, random act of violence. The case was heavily supported by direct evidence. Surveillance footage inside the train captured the attack in its entirety. This recording provided irrefutable proof of the sequence of events. The knife used in the stabbing was recovered and secured as part of the investigation. Passenger testimonies were collected immediately. Some witnesses described Brown's actions, others recounted the victim's lack of reaction or defense, and many confirmed there was no verbal exchange leading up to the violence. Together, the combination of physical evidence, video documentation, and eyewitness accounts created a detailed record of the incident. The investigation into the death of Iryna Zarutska moved quickly due to the presence of surveillance cameras on the Charlotte Area Transit System, CAT's Blue Line train. From the beginning, law enforcement authorities had access to real-time video of the incident, showing the attack in detail. The footage was graphic and captured the precise sequence of events. Iryna seated in her work uniform, the suspect sitting directly behind her, and then the sudden and unprovoked assault with a folding knife. On September 5, 2025, CATS released this video publicly. The decision to release the footage was controversial, but officials justified it as a step toward transparency and to address widespread speculation about the nature of the crime. The footage made one fact immediately clear. The attack was unprovoked. At no point did the victim and suspect speak to each other, exchange glances, or make any contact before the stabbing began. This dispelled rumors of any prior altercation or hidden motive between them. Law enforcement statements followed the release. Charlotte-Mecklenburg Police Department, CMPD, officials confirmed that there was no known prior connection between Iryna Zarutska and Decarlos Brown Jr. They emphasized that the motive remained undetermined, as Brown had not provided any clear explanation for his actions. Police and prosecutors noted that Brown's mental health history and erratic behavior would be considered during proceedings, but from the perspective of evidence, the attack was entirely random. The public release of the video did not end the matter. Instead, it raised more pressing questions within the community. Chief among them was, why was Brown free at the time of the incident? His record showed at least 14 prior arrests, including violent offenses. He had served time in prison and had recent charges before being released on bail earlier in 2025. For many, the crime highlighted gaps in the criminal justice system, particularly surrounding the release of repeat offenders with documented mental health conditions. The second question echoed across news outlets and social media. Could this have been prevented? Critics pointed to prior warning signs, including Brown's delusional 911 calls and previous violent acts. They argued that institutional failure, from courts to public transit security, allowed him to commit another crime despite numerous red flags. The case revealed weaknesses across several layers of the justice and public safety systems. At the center of the controversy was a decision to release Brown on cashless bail prior to the incident. Court records show that Judge Teresa Stokes approved his release without requiring financial bond. This decision was made despite Brown's criminal history, violent offenses, and documented mental illness. The backlash was immediate after Zerutska's death. Political figures, particularly Republican lawmakers, demanded the judge's removal from the bench, arguing that her decision directly enabled the tragedy. Supporters of bail reform countered that the issue was broader than one decision and reflected flaws in how dangerous offenders are evaluated. Brown's documented schizophrenia also came under scrutiny. His prior arrests and incidents showed signs of untreated mental illness, including delusions and paranoia. However, rather than receiving long-term treatment in a facility, he cycled in and out of jail and homelessness. Experts highlighted this as a systemic failure, noting the absence of robust mental health infrastructure capable of addressing individuals with severe conditions who also pose public safety risks. The debate quickly polarized. Some argued that offenders like Brown belong in prison due to their threat to society, while others stress a need for medical treatment over incarceration. Another major point of criticism was the lack of security on Charlotte's public transit system. On the night of the incident, no officers were present on the train or at the nearby stations. Critics noted that this was not the first time concerns about cats' safety had been raised. Previous warnings about the lack of uniformed officers and the vulnerability of riders had been largely ignored. The system security budget also came under fire, with many questioning whether funds had been properly allocated to ensure rider safety. In the wake of the murder, demands for armed officers aboard trains and increased surveillance grew stronger. On the state level, Decarlos Brown was charged with first-degree murder in Mecklenburg County. This charge carried the potential for life imprisonment without parole under North Carolina law. Authorities scheduled his initial court date for September 19, 2025. The state case was expected to focus heavily on the video evidence, eyewitness testimony, and Brown's criminal history. In addition to state prosecution, federal charges were filed. Brown was charged under a federal statute titled Act Causing Death on a Mass Transportation System. This statute gave federal authorities jurisdiction over the case due to the crime's location on public transit. Federal prosecutors noted that this charge made Brown eligible for the death penalty. The dual prosecution, state and federal, reflected the seriousness of the crime and the wider implications for public safety. The case quickly attracted political attention. The North Carolina Attorney General announced his office would pursue the maximum penalty available under the law. National leaders also weighed in, framing the incident as more than an isolated act of violence. They argued it demonstrated systemic failures in criminal justice, bail reform, mental health services, and public safety infrastructure. While some leaders pushed for harsher penalties for repeat offenders, others highlighted the urgent need for systemic reforms to prevent similar crimes in the future. The killing of Iryna Zarutska triggered not only an immediate investigation, but also a broad wave of responses from her family, the local community, and officials. The aftermath of her death became a focal point for larger discussions about public safety, refugee vulnerability, systemic justice failures, and the adequacy of transit security in the United States. The events following her death shed light on deeper issues that extend beyond a single act of violence. Iryna's family bore the weight of grief while navigating complex circumstances. Her father, still in Ukraine amid the ongoing war, was unable to attend his daughter's funeral. Political instability and travel restrictions in Ukraine made his presence impossible, underscoring the challenges refugees face when tragedy strikes abroad. The family released statements acknowledging their loss and sought to raise awareness about the vulnerability of refugees who come to the United States in search of safety. Their efforts extended beyond mourning. They aimed to ensure that Iryna's death would be recognized not simply as a random act of violence, but as part of a broader pattern of systemic issues that left her exposed to harm. In response to the tragedy, a GoFundMe campaign was launched to assist the family with funeral expenses and ongoing needs. The campaign drew significant public support, with contributions flowing from both local residents and individuals around the world who were touched by Iryna's story. While legitimate fundraising efforts gained traction, attempts to establish a defense fund for the suspect emerged online. These efforts were quickly removed following public backlash. The contrast between community support for the victim's family and the rejection of financial support for the accused highlighted the intensity of public sentiment around the case. The community response was marked by widespread outrage directed at the justice system. Many questioned why a repeat offender with a violent history was released into the public under cashless bail conditions. Social media amplified these concerns, with users pointing to failures in protecting innocent people from known threats. Refugee organizations and advocacy groups also voiced strong reactions. Sympathy extended toward refugee communities, recognizing that individuals fleeing conflict often carry expectations of safety in their new environments. Iryna's death was interpreted as a stark reminder of the gap between those expectations and reality. Activism spread across digital platforms, where hashtags tied to safety, refugee rights, and bail reform gained momentum. These conversations became part of a larger national dialogue, transcending Charlotte and reaching audiences who viewed the case as emblematic of systemic issues across the United States. Mayor Vi Lyles addressed the public by calling the incident heartbreaking and urging citizens to respect the victim's memory. She emphasized that Charlotte must remain a safe and welcoming community. The mayor also announced plans to increase security measures across the Charlotte Area Transit System, CATS. However, critics argued that the response was delayed and insufficient. Advocacy groups and citizens demanded concrete actions, such as the deployment of armed officers on trains and a reevaluation of security protocols that have failed to prevent the incident. The case underscored the vulnerability of refugees. Iryna had fled Ukraine's war in search of safety, yet became a victim of violence in the very environment where she sought protection. This raised questions about the ability of host countries to safeguard displaced populations, particularly when they rely on public infrastructure like mass transit systems. The decision to release the suspect on cashless bail drew heavy criticism. Many argued that the justice system enabled repeat offenders with violent pasts to re-enter society without adequate supervision. This highlighted the tension between bail reform policies designed to prevent economic discrimination and the need to protect the public from individuals with proven violent tendencies. The suspect's mental health condition added another dimension. His schizophrenia, combined with documented history of erratic behavior and violence, suggested systemic failures in addressing mental illness before it escalated into deadly acts. The case intensified debates about whether individuals with severe psychiatric conditions should be detained, treated, or monitored differently to prevent harm. The incident sparked demands for increased safety on public transit. Proposals included assigning armed officers to every train, improving surveillance, and creating faster emergency response systems. Advocates argued that transit systems must adapt to protect riders from unpredictable acts of violence. The lack of visible security on the train at the time of the attack became a key point of contention. The release of the surveillance footage raised ethical debates. While the video provided transparency and clarity about what happened, it also spread graphic imagery of the victim's death. Some argued that the footage was essential for accountability, while others questioned whether it was appropriate to share such explicit material publicly. Another ethical debate centered on bystander inaction. Passengers on the train reacted differently. Some attempted to help, others recorded, and many froze. This disparity fueled discussions about social responsibility, human behavior during crises, and whether society should expect or mandate intervention from witnesses in violent incidents. The legal process of the suspect, Decarlos Brown Jr., remains ongoing. At the state level, he faces a first-degree murder charge in Mecklenburg County, with hearings scheduled to proceed in late September 2025. In parallel, Federal prosecutors charge him with causing death on a mass transportation system, a crime that carries eligibility for the death penalty. The dual state and federal prosecutions reflect the gravity of the case. The case influenced legislative discussions in North Carolina and beyond. Lawmakers began reviewing bail reform policies, with some proposing mandatory detention for repeat violent offenders or individuals with untreated severe mental illnesses. Proposals also included enhanced coordination between courts, law enforcement, and mental health services to identify high-risk individuals before they re-enter the community. The Charlotte area transit system initiated plans for expanded security protocols. This included deploying more officers to trains, increasing surveillance coverage, and introducing rapid response units to handle emergencies. Beyond Charlotte, other cities began reevaluating their own transit safety policies, recognizing that the vulnerabilities exposed by this case could apply nationwide. The case of Iryna Zarutska revealed more than the circumstances of a single crime. It became a lens through which larger issues of justice, safety, and accountability were examined. Her story illustrated the dangerous intersections of refugee vulnerability, systemic failures in the criminal justice system, inadequate mental health infrastructure, and lapses in public transit safety. The ongoing legal proceedings and legislative debates suggest that her death may influence reforms aimed at preventing similar tragedies. For the community, her case continues to represent both a call for justice and a reminder of the consequences when systemic safeguards fail. Although her life was cut short, the questions raised by her death continue to push institutions toward confronting long-ignored failures, ensuring that her story remains central in discussions about safety, justice, and responsibility. If you found this story as gripping and heartbreaking as we did, don't forget to like this video and share it with others. And if you want to hear more true crime stories that uncover the mysteries behind these tragic events, make sure to subscribe to our channel and turn on the notification bell. You won't want to miss our latest stories, updates, and discussions. Thank you for joining us on this journey to seek justice and explore the truth. Together, we can make a difference. Until next time, stay safe and stay aware.